the structure of the eye, we have to focus a little more on the internal components now. So if we start with this image of the eyeball, you're going to notice that the first thing I have up here is the cornea. Cornea is this front portion of your eye. For example, if you wear contacts, that's where the contact sits on. If you don't, it's the part of the eye you simply touch. That is the cornea of the eye. It's meant to be clear, allow light to pass through. You have the anterior cavity. Now, this anterior cavity is made up both by an anterior chamber and a posterior chamber. But the anterior cavity itself is what's in front of or anterior to the actual lens. We'll get to that in a second. So we have the anterior chamber, which is what's up here. Then we have the posterior chamber, a little back here. From there, we go to the pupil. Now the pupil is going to be this opening space right here. The pupil is what light can pass through. So we've gone from now the initial cornea into the anterior cavity, and now through the opening, which is going to be the pupil. Now around the pupil is going to be the iris. So the iris is the colored portion around your eye, here and here. The iris, a lot of times you'll see as someone has blue eyes or green eyes or brown eyes or hazel eyes or whatever eye color they have. The eye color, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the actual iris. Now, if you've heard of the term iris before, maybe you're thinking of photography, cameras have an iris that closes, or other things that adjust the amounts of light. The iris's job is to control how much light passes through the pupil. So for example, on a bright sunny day, the pupil is very small as the iris closes down. But on a very dim day, maybe towards dusk, the pupil is much larger because the iris has opened up. That's why a lot of times you'll see more color in someone's eye on a brighter sunny day compared to a more shadowed or a dusk time of day. So the light traveling from that cornea through the anterior segment, through the pupil, not through the actual iris. The iris blocks light. We then have the lens. This structure right here is the lens. Now the lens is meant to allow the light to pass through, but it's meant to help focus the light. It's a lens, basically. It's going to change the direction of light. Its whole goal is to focus the light into your eye. And this lens can actually change shape just a little bit, focusing on near or focusing on far. The lens is held in place by these suspensory ligaments. Now, the suspensory ligaments are just these little tiny lines that go all around. Now, it would go all the way around a full 360, but the image obviously is only two-dimensional. Think of a trampoline. If the actual mat you jump on was the lens, all those springs running all the way around it, that would be the suspensory ligaments. And then the metal ring or the metal triangle or the metal square or the metal whatever you're using, obviously circle I think is the most common, but whatever the outside metal piece is that's holding those springs, that's the ciliary body. That's the structure that anchors it. And it has muscles that can pull a little bit to help change the shape of that lens, remember. We then have the posterior cavity. Now the posterior cavity is everything back here. It's pretty much everything behind or posterior to the actual eye lens itself. So once you get past that lens, it's this whole open space. Now the posterior cavity is filled with vitreous humor. It's kind of a water-like solution, but it's a little bit thicker. Think more towards the lines of mucus level. And when you go back to the anterior chamber, and the anterior cavity for that matter, we had aqueous humor. So the aqueous humor. Aqueous humor is more pure water-like. It's just the kind of same consistency. So your eye is filled with these two different fluids. The vitreous humor posterior to the eyeball, the posterior cavity, and the anterior cavity filled with aqueous humor. It's this liquid inside that helps to maintain the pressure and the shape of the eyeball. Now moving on back. And the back side of your eye, so the posterior side of this actual posterior cavity, is the fovea centralis. This small little area back here is the point of the highest visual acuity. Basically what that means is that's the point where your vision is the sharpest. That's where the lens is trying to focus the light. It's trying to focus it back here onto the fovea centralis. The retina is the most internal of the three layers of your eye. In this image, you're seeing this yellow color is the retina. The retina is where you're going to have these photoreceptors. All this information being received is on the retina. Those rods and cones, for example. The choroid layer is the middle layer. It almost looks like this transparent layer right here on this image. From the choroid layer, you go to the external layer, which is the sclera. The sclera is the white around the outside of the eye. It's the most external layer. It's also the thickest and strongest of the layers, the sclera. We then have this area called the optic disc. It's this area right here. Now, it's not the fovea centralis. It's usually just next to it. But what's interesting about the optic disc, it's a blind spot. Anything that's focused on that particular point, you can't see. You're saying, hold on, I don't have any blind spots in my eye. That's because your brain is going to take the information found on both sides and all around it, and it's going to fill in the gap. It's going to assume whatever's on each side and around that blind spot must be in the middle of it as well. So without you even thinking about it, the brain extrapolates from around the images and fills in the gap. If you're curious to try to find your blind spot, grab a piece of paper, put 2 dots on it, or put an X and a dot. Take the one that's more towards the middle and focus on your eye. The outside dot, as you move closer, and as long as you keep focusing on that one spot, the outside dot usually eventually will disappear at a certain distance. So it's kind of helping to locate the blind spot a little bit. It's usually a little more lateral. Then we have the optic nerve, cranial nerve number 2, as well as the blood vessels. Those are the reason for the optic disc, the blind spot. Now, the entire eye has all these photoreceptors, which means all these receptors must have neurons associated with them. All those neurons are going to be running back out the optic nerve, which means because of how many of the actual neurons are running there, there's no room for more photoreceptors. That spot is the blind spot. Then we have just the lateral rectus and medial rectus muscles, just kind of an orientation in this view. So all of these structures of the eye, a lot of parts and pieces. What's the pathway of light through the eye? We know it starts up here at the cornea. It then goes through that anterior chamber. That's where you have the aqueous humor. It then goes to the pupil, then goes through the lens, then goes to this whole posterior chamber and the vitreous humor, and then it ends, hopefully, at the fovea centralis. So the pathway of light heading through the eye, cornea, anterior chamber, aqueous humor, through the actual pupil there, into the lens, through the posterior chamber with the vitreous humor, and back to the actual fovea centralis. So trying to put the piece together, not just individual parts, they all function to make your eye. So some components of the eyeball and what they're doing.